Across America, BP supports more than 275,000 jobs to keep energy flowing. Jobs like updating turbines at one of our Indiana wind farms and producing more oil and gas with fewer operational emissions in the Gulf of Mexico. It's and, not or. See what doing both means for energy nationwide at bp.com/investing in America.
The stress and crowds of holiday shopping can put a damper on your holiday spirit, and you don't always find all the perfect gifts you're looking for. The Virginia Lottery's games make easy and tremendously fun gifts for all the adults in your life, even you. Spruce up your gift-giving game this holiday season with the Virginia Lottery. The Virginia Lottery's holiday scratchers are a gift any adult will love. Treat yourself to some winter wonderment and play the lottery's holiday online instant games from anywhere in Virginia. Visit valottery.com/holiday. Please gift responsibly. Lottery games are not for minors.
Hey, it's Ryan Holiday, host of the Daily Stoic podcast. When I bought my first house in 2013, part of the way I paid for it was we would rent it out on Airbnb in Austin when there was South by Southwest or F1 or ACL. And then later, when that tiny little house became my office, I would work there, I'd do my writing during the week. Then on the weekends, we'd rent it out to people who were coming in from out of town on Airbnb. And you may be sitting on an Airbnb and not even know it. You've probably had the same experience. You stayed in an Airbnb and thought, this is doable. Maybe I could rent my place on Airbnb. And it's really that simple. You can start with a spare room or you can rent your whole place. Maybe you're traveling to see friends and family for the holidays. While you're away, your home could be an Airbnb. Your home might be worth more than you think. Find out at airbnb.com/host.
Content warning, this episode contains discussion of the murder of two girls.
So today, October 31st, 2023, there was a pre-trial hearing in the case of Richard M. Allen, who of course stands charged with the murders of Liberty German and Abigail Williams. We were at that hearing. By the time you hear this episode, you probably heard the big news from the hearing, which is...
Once again, Rozzi and Baldwin, Bradley Rozzi and Andrew Baldwin, the two original defense attorneys on the case, are gone. They are no longer on the case.
And the secondary big news, I would say, is that the trial date has been moved back nearly a year to mid-October of 2024. So now that you know that big news, we're going to try to go through this whole hearing in detail and tell you what we saw, what we heard, and hopefully what we make of it all.
My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases. We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is the Delphi murders. Andrew Baldwin and Bradley Rozzi and William Lebrato and Robert Scremin and David Hennessy for the defense.
So the hearing was at 9 a.m. this morning, or rather it was scheduled to begin at 9 a.m. And as we've often noted, the Carroll County Courthouse, where this hearing was held, is relatively small. It has poor acoustics. So if you want to get there and get a decent seat so you can actually hear what's happening, you need to get there very, 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 very early.
So we did. And we weren't there first. There were some nice ladies in front of us and a couple of people sort of there alongside us. So, we waited I think we all almost got frostbite because it was actually quite cold out today, but it was worth it. And it was some nice conversations between people waiting there. It's nice to see other podcasters like Bob Motta of the Defense Diaries there. It's also nice to see other news outlets and media figures that we've gotten to know. So it's definitely always interesting to go and see. And also just the civilians who want to know what exactly is going on and how can I get more information on this case. It's great to see people like that.
And give you a bit of a sneak preview, as Anya says, Bob Motta, the host of the Defense Diaries, was there. We did ask him to come on the show in the future to talk about all this stuff, and he agreed. So we will try to get something scheduled so you can all hear his take on what's been going on in this case.
Yeah, he is very well versed. He is a defense attorney himself, and all we need to do is figure out when all of our schedules are less crazy so we can sit down and talk about some of this like we do when we're waiting in line. So going into today, there's been a lot of back and forth and activity around the defense because let's just recap quickly. So at some point, the defense essentially admitted that a leak had sprung from their side through a man named Mitch Westerman, who was close personal friends with Andrew Baldwin and a former employee, and apparently accessed discovery images in Baldwin's office and leaked those. And this started a huge chain of events that has sort of culminated with Baldwin and Rozzi being essentially asked to withdraw from the case. And on October 19th, there was a hearing where everyone was sort of bracing for there's going to be some back and forth about this. But instead, Judge Gull informed the courtroom, Judge Fran Gull, who of course is the judge on the Delphi case, she informed the courtroom, these two have withdrawn. Baldwin has withdrawn orally, and Rozzi indicated that he intends to withdraw in a brief that would be filed. So, okay, so they're leaving. Just kidding, because then Rozzi starts filing again, saying that he shouldn't have to leave. Judge Gull should have to leave because it's biased, and some things she's done in the case have been biased. We talked about all of that in the episodes dedicated to that. And then Baldwin recently also sort of filed back into it saying, actually, I want to be a pro bono defense attorney for Allen because he wants me to stay.
And meanwhile, Judge Gull had appointed two other defense attorneys to represent Richard Allen in this case, William Lebrato and Robert Scremin, who we owe an apology to because in an earlier episode we mispronounced his name, and some very nice people corrected us, for which we thank them.
Yeah, thank you to that listener who said something, because I know she's corrected us before and she's always on the money. So shout out to her. So that's,
that sets the stage for what was going to happen today.
We should note in the background, the Indiana Supreme Court also comes into play because a third set of attorneys on behalf of Richard Allen filed asking the Indiana Supreme Court to intervene. And essentially they're arguing that Judge Gull has not properly made records public. They even cited the 118 documents that we got released when we filed into the case asking for their release. And that was cited as an example as like, it's good that she released these, but they were all labeled poorly and it wasn't easy to navigate. So they're kind of actually bringing up a lot of different records, issues. That's seemingly not with any sort of intent to like get her thrown off the case, more of just perhaps, start doing things more transparently, or critics might say, give her a black eye in the public eye.
And one other thing worth noting is that once Andrew Baldwin's, for lack of a better word, his lack of control over discovery materials became an issue in this case, he became represented in this case by David Hennessy, Mr. Murder, a prominent criminal defense attorney in the Indianapolis area who we've interviewed on our show. And I want to talk about Mr. Hennessy now because the public is allowed into the courtroom at 8 o'clock. I think about a half hour or so later, David Hennessy comes in and he sits in the general audience section and he begins having a very loud conversation with someone. And some of the things he said were interesting. We overheard pretty much everything he said.
I think maybe our side of the courtroom overheard him.
Yeah, he was talking really loudly, and I was frankly a little surprised. As I'm sure many of you do, I follow politics, and there's something called oppo research. And basically, oppo research is when a candidate or someone working with a candidate researches the opposition, researches the other candidates, and tries to find things about them that are negative that their candidate can use to win the election. And so I say that because basically it appeared to us that the loud things that David Hennessy were saying were essentially oppo research points regarding new attorneys, on this case, Robert Scremin and William Lebrato. And I also want to stress that the things he was saying about them were not about their professional abilities. It was rather more pointed comments about their more personal failings or alleged personal failings.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was not, for example, anything to do with that video that has surfaced of Scremin making comments on the Delphi case, which I think a lot of people have reasonably raised concerns about, yours truly included. We have concerns about that. So this was not like discussing things that are in the news or on, being talked about on social media. This was actually going after these men personally. So it's kind of interesting.
I was surprised. I'm surprised he did it so loudly. I'm surprised that apparently the defense team either spent time researching to get this material or someone sent it to them and they took it seriously and wanted to spread it. I don't know.
I think it's just, it's kind of maybe a little concerning is the word, because I suppose, I very much understand. And from the tenor of their arguments, from the tenor of their filings, Rozzi and Baldwin seem to be operating under the impression that they alone can help Richard Allen. They're the attorneys for the job. And I understand that. And I'm sure he appreciates and appreciated that confidence from them. And so I'm not saying that to be critical, but that is kind of the thing that they're putting out there. And so I can understand if you're saying, hey, I'm the only one who can do this. And then two new guys come in, perhaps there is bad blood there. Perhaps there is some feeling like, well, you can't do what we can do. And that's a human, understandable feeling. But I guess now that we've seen the upshot of all this is that they are removed from the case, whereas Scremin and Lebrato remain on. Is there much good in the old defense team and individuals like Hennessy associated with them smearing the new defense attorneys on a personal level?
On a personal level. Again, this was not professional. This was personal.
I don't
failings.
see how that really benefits Richard Allen, to be honest. I would think that if there were concerns about how they were going to perform, then Rozzi and Baldwin are certainly capable of perhaps guiding them to things that they feel are important and trying to work with them rather than putting them on blast in front of a courtroom of reporters through Hennessy. Because let me emphasize, we're not eavesdropping. Everybody on our row could hear this. I would not be surprised if people in the hallway heard this. It was pretty loud.
I wouldn't be surprised if my parents, who live in Columbus, Indiana, and were probably sitting at home quietly minding their own business, I would not be surprised if they heard it.
Yeah, it
was very loud.
It was very loud. And it was just surprising because ultimately all the attorneys who, we rattled off in the title of this episode should be working for Allen's defense, not the defense of one another. And I would think that I very much understand that there could be, again, feelings that we'd do a better job. No, we would, blah, blah, blah. That's fine. But I don't think, trying to essentially try the new defense attorneys in the court of public opinion is necessarily doing Mr. Allen any favors at all.
I want to say one more thing in this particular stretch of remarks made by Mr. Hennessy. He also potentially gave a preview of what's next. As we all know, earlier this week, there was a writ of mandamus filed with the Supreme Court related to this case. And Hennessy said, again, very loudly, there may be a second writ now that Judge Gold, is on the Supreme Court's radar. No idea what that means.
So essentially, they have flagged her on the radar of the Supreme Court. That's part of the goal. And now we can expect something else to come out, perhaps, to further that goal. The end result, I would guess, from their perspective, would be ideally she is removed and they come back on in some capacity. I don't know how today's hearing jeopardizes or doesn't jeopardize that. It seems like a lot of things are in flux, and it's so unusual that it's hard to say what happens next from here.
At this point, there was kind of a flurry of comings and goings. Nick McClelland, prosecutor, came in with James Luttrell, who recently filed an appearance to work with Prosecutor McClelland on this case. Indiana State Police Superintendent Doug Carter came in. Indiana State Police Sergeant Jerry Holman came in. I believe Dave Vito of the Indiana State Police was already there. Baldwin and Rozzi came in. They shook hands with Nick. Then I think it's worth noting we started hearing more comments pretty loudly from David Hennessy. Cannot stress enough how loud this man was.
Also, it was kind of an unexpected press conference in a way, because it seemed, intentionally, in volume intended to carry and get to other people within this small space of rows and rows of benches.
He then said that attorneys Baldwin and Rozzi did not put in payment for their services until May and did not receive payment for their services on this case until September of 2023. And then he indicated that this case adversely affected their private practices.
Yeah, I would not be surprised by that. The opportunity costs alone would probably be pretty extreme, of them putting off other work or not doing other work because they're focusing so much on Delphi. Of course, the case was pretty much within sight by the time they were kicked off, so I don't doubt that. So, yeah.
And before we get to the actual hearing itself, there's one more little interlude with David Hennessy that I wanted to highlight. New defense attorneys William Lebrato and Robert Scremin came into the courtroom about 9:35-ish. And Robert Scremin, when he saw Hennessy, greeted him very warmly. He said, "I didn't know if you'd be here or not." He came over. They exchanged some very friendly words. And watching this, it just seemed ironic to recall that Robert Scremin, unbeknownst to him, was being very friendly and gracious and kind to David Hennessy, a man who, like 45 minutes earlier, had been, bashing him in front of anyone who would listen.
Yeah, that was fascinating. Just a interesting little moment.
And then Judge Gull came in. And typically all of these things run very, very smoothly. But today didn't seem to be as smooth as usual. And one unusual thing is that Judge Gull came in, and it was only then that Attorney Rozzi kind of frantically motions for Richard Allen to be brought in.
Yeah, that was bizarre. And may I just add to that, it preceded that, because Nick McClelland at one point was running in and running out of the room. It felt like at one point I saw him ask one of the deputies where Luttrell was. And when the deputy didn't seem to know, he sort of ran out again. It was like match-up lawyers kind of coming in and coming out. And then you just see this incredibly lopsided defense side where, there's two prosecutors and then there's 500 people at the defense table. Who's the real attorneys? Of course, Rozzi and Baldwin have posted themselves at the main table sitting next to the person that they're, trying to very much continue to have as their client. But these other two new attorneys, who are technically the ones on the case, are being shunted to the side. They're sitting behind them. They're being put on blast by Baldwin's own attorney in the case. It's just really it was such a weird thing to watch happen. And it just underscores how bizarre this situation is and how, frankly, detrimental and negative the situation is for the case. I just can't underscore that enough. It's just, this is not how things are supposed to work.
So Rozzi motions for Richard Allen to be brought in, and one thing I recall noticing was that it was a bit eerie, but you could actually hear the sound of his shackles rattling well before you could see Richard Allen himself set foot into the courtroom.
Yeah, always ominous.
What did you think about Richard Allen's appearance today as opposed to how we've seen him in earlier appearances?
In earlier appearances, we've both been very concerned, and I know a lot of people have expressed concern. He's appeared incredibly thin, flesh hanging off his bones, gray pallor to his complexion, looking like a man who's deeply unwell, deeply unhealthy, and perhaps, really struggling, definitely giving credence to the concerns about him being housed in Westville. Today, he looked like he'd gained a decent amount of weight. He looked at a healthier weight. His skin was more pink and had more life to it. And he generally moved and appeared like a man in significantly better health than he had been recently. So I don't know what exactly has changed. He's still wearing all the shackles, which, frankly can be disturbing to see. He's wearing his yellow prison jumpsuit. He still has that wide eye expression that he often has when he's in the courtroom. But he certainly looks a lot different than he did.
He did appear to me to make eye contact with his wife. And even though he did have that expression in his eyes that you note, he did not seem to be out of it today in ways that he'd seemed out of it in previous court hearings. Would you agree with that?
I would definitely agree. This was a different side to him that we've seen. He looked better. So I don't know. We can't really speculate on why that would be, but it's just something to note because there has been so much interest in that side of things.
Judge Gull actually began by noting that attorney Lebrato had filed a motion that morning to continue the trial. That, of course, means that he was basically asking for the trial date to be delayed. And his reason for that was that he and his colleague, Mr. Scremin, have only recently come onto this case. There's a huge amount of discovery. There's basically no way that they can be prepared to go to trial in early January, which was the date that had been set earlier. And when this motion was being discussed, it was stated the state has no objection. And from the audience, David Hennessy very loudly says, "Mr. Allen objects. Come on, fellas." And it was shortly after that Andy Baldwin said, Mr. Allen has asked us to represent him.
Yes.
And Judge Gull, with a very, to my mind, very cold tone, she stared at Baldwin and Rozzi, and she said, prior to the hearing on the 19th, you withdrew representation in this case rather than being removed for gross negligence. What has changed? At that point, Brad Rozzi stands up and he essentially repeats a few of the arguments that he's made in the filings that you've probably all read or at least heard us discuss. He says that, we said we'd withdraw, but we didn't really mean it. It was just a strategic move because we were forced into it.
So we were forced to lie, I guess. I guess it's surprising to me that they're acknowledging that they did withdraw and that is what they did say, but that was not true before the court. That just, I don't know. I guess I was expecting maybe something more like, we didn't really say that. We just kind of walked off in a huff.
Rozzi also noted that, last night he and Baldwin had filed into this case pro bono. And he said basically, well, the rules are different for pro bono private attorneys as opposed to public defense attorneys. And Judge Gull just, again, stares at him and says, so nothing has changed in the 12 days since I found gross negligence. And, Rozzi basically wanted due process.
That's what he said. He said, I want due process. And that's sort of something that we'll get into even more later. But yeah, I guess I was a little bit surprised by some of this because I certainly didn't expect to see the old defense attorneys, Rozzi and Baldwin, sitting in the main chair doing all this. And I guess once I saw them there, I sort of thought, okay, what's the plan here? Is there going to be some fancy lawyering, I suppose, that maybe forces them to come back on or makes it so that what they want can't be denied? And I was sort of expecting to hear some trump card, some winning hand that was going to be played. And we didn't see that today. I'm certainly not saying that this isn't part of some longer strategy to get what they want, but we did not see any of that today.
Today, we saw a repeat of the arguments we already saw in the filings. Judge Golden turned to Prosecutor McClelland and basically said, what do you make of this? What do you think? And Prosecutor McClelland indicated, he's at a loss. He says he was in chambers for that session with the judge and the defense attorneys. And he said, I agree, they were grossly negligent in how they handled this case.
He also backed up the judge's account of what happened. So we're getting, everybody's sort of on the same page of, yes, we did say we would withdraw.
And he indicated that this episode with the leak of photos and trial strategy was not an isolated incident. He mentions there was an earlier leak in December. He says that there were earlier motions filed by the defense that he indicated had lies in them.
Yeah, he said outright lies. So it was not like misinfo or like you interpreted this wrong. He said outright lies.
He likely was referring, at least in part, to the emergency motion to transport motion, which was filed last April, where they made lots of very colorful and dramatic statements about Richard Allen's condition in Westville. And when a hearing was held to air out those matters in June, I think it seemed like a lot of the things they said weren't really supported by facts. Is that a fair assessment?
That is a fair assessment. For example, they were saying, he's walking around in this filthy shirt that then was quickly assessed to be one of many shirts that he has, that he just happened to be wearing that, and that, therefore the photo of him in it could be taken as a opportunity to sway the court of public opinion without really necessarily leaning too hard on the facts. And of course, I think that gets to a fundamental issue, right or wrong between Judge Gull and this defense team. It's different opinions on what is reasonable and also what is reasonable to do in order to sway the court of public opinion versus the actual court.
He also talked about the Franks motion, the Franks memorandum. He said that memorandum was arguing theory of a case rather than facts. In other words, it wasn't really discussing the facts that you would expect to be highlighted. A memorandum of this, it was just being used as a vehicle to discuss the defense's theory of the case. He said all of this, including potentially the more recent leak, speaks to the defense's seeming desire to try the case in the public eye and not in this courtroom. And again, he said, gross negligence was happened here. So what did Judge Gull say?
She essentially addressed Richard Allen directly. She apologized to him. She indicated that essentially she was aware that he wanted to keep his old attorneys and that she was sorry, but that she felt that she could not allow for that. Specifically, she said, paraphrasing, that you are entitled to adequate and vigorous representatives. And then, quote, I cannot and will not allow these attorneys to represent you. So indicating that at the very least, she does not feel that they are adequate attorneys to represent. This is a situation where it sort of seems like either way is going to be some sort of appeal over this, because if Rozzi and Baldwin had remained on and lost, then I see it as a situation where Allen could have turned around for however much he loved these attorneys. If they lost, he has no reason to not turn around and say, well, they were obviously incompetent. They made a huge mistake by leaking all this stuff, defense strategy, images, And that obviously hurt me. And why the heck would the court allow these guys to stay on after they did this? So I want an appeal. I want fair. This was incompetent counsel. And then if they leave, if they're forced out, then they're in a situation where his attorneys of choice, the people he's bonded with, the people he feels are doing a good job representing him, are being torn away from him, and new people are coming on that he doesn't know and he does not have that bond with. So it feels like either way, this is just a mess. Is that, I mean, am I overly simplifying this?
No, that's fair. So while this was going on, while basically Judge Gull was firing attorneys Andrew Baldwin and Brad Rozzi in front of their client, while she was calling them grossly negligent, you saw something interesting.
I saw Alan turn his head. He looked back in the direction that I think Kathy Allen was sitting in, sort of behind him to an angle, and he mouthed, "It's okay." And he kind of nodded vigorously then. So I felt like he was looking at his family members, his mother and his wife, and signaling to them whatever exactly he wanted to say. I don't know, but he was letting them know it was okay. And so I will be curious. I'm sure maybe that's some sort of private communication. Maybe they'll discuss it. You know, I know they're in contact via, even when he's in prison. So it's a reminder that, a lot of this stuff is just dragging everything out for families on both sides of the issue. But when it comes to, how would you describe Gull's demeanor and the attorney's demeanor from the beginning and of the end of this situation?
It was very solemn. I would say that Rozzi had a bit of a pugnacious spirit, at least briefly. It
seemed to kind of sink as he went on. Like he started off like fighting, and then it kind of was just like, but Judge, like, this is what we're trying to say, and just kind of ebbed.
And then Baldwin, after he was removed from the case by the judge for gross negligence, she said, "When will you return discovery materials?" And he said, "Well, maybe by the end of the week." And she said, "No, do it today or as soon as possible." And he just seemed very sad and defeated then.
I'll be curious to see whether these new attorneys continue on the same theories and practices of the old attorneys, whether they go their own way, whether there's some combination where they're taking some things and working with them on others, and then maybe not everything. I just don't know, but it'll be curious to see what becomes of the defense of Richard Allen, because it's just in a very bizarre and frankly troubled place right now, in my view.
And it's interesting because, like you say, we don't know what exactly it meant when Richard Allen mouthed the words, "It's okay," to his wife. At the Murder Sheet, we spend so much time digging into crime stories that sometimes it's difficult to find the time to plan out and cook elaborate, nutritious meals. That's why we are so excited about our sponsor, Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal delivery service. Our sponsors make this podcast possible. So if you go to factormeals.com/msheet and use our special code MSHEET, you're not just getting half off this high-quality meal plan. You're supporting us too.
So I'm obsessed with Factor. I had their creamed corn chicken and their tomato basil chicken risotto recently. Both were delicious. That risotto in particular was amazing. Plus, the whole process was a breeze. All I had to do was pop the meal into the microwave. The food was tasty and flavorful, which is no surprise given that each recipe is specifically crafted by chefs and approved by dietitians.
Having Factor during the hectic holiday season has been a boon, especially with us pumping out so many episodes. Head to factormeals.com/msheet and use code MSHEET to get 50% off. That's code MSHEET at factormeals.com/msheet to get 50% off.
Have you heard? You can listen to your gripping investigations ad-free. Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app or visit amazon.com/truecrime ad-free. That's amazon.com/truecrime ad-free. And catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Hey listeners, this is Candace DeLong, the host of Killer Psyche. Imagine all your audio entertainment available in just one place. That's what the Audible app is all about. With Audible, you can always find the best of what you love or discover something new. Audible has an incredible selection of mystery and thriller titles and originals like Something Ain't Right by Roger and Zachary Stringer, The Space Within by Greg O'Connor and Josh Fagan, and Moriarty, an Audible original. Membership includes access to Audible originals, podcasts, and tons of audiobooks that you can download or stream as much as you want. And as an Audible member, you can choose one title per month from an ever-growing catalog of titles to keep. The Audible app makes it easy to listen anytime, anywhere, whether you're traveling, working out, doing chores, wherever your day takes you. New members can try Audible now for free for 30 days. Visit audible.com/DeLong or text DeLong to 500-500.
And then the judge and the new attorneys, Scremin and Lebrato, started the process of setting a new trial date, which they ultimately determined would be tentatively set for October 15th through the 31st of 2024. And while they were in the process of doing that, something else was going on.
So David Hennessy at this point had been like grabbing onto the row of chairs in front of us, like kind of like holding on like he's on a crazy ride or something. And then he starts getting up. He's been kind of like shouting Andy's name. I don't know whether he's saying Andy or A or something. He was like kind of seemingly trying to get his client's attention while his client was in the middle of, his own thing. And that wasn't working. So then he starts pacing around. He tries to access the defense seats. A deputy tells him to, stop and sit down. He, has not been called out there, so he can't just barge in. Then he starts trying to get around the other way and start kind of like leaning over to talk to Andy. And another defense attorney says, basically like, he'll be okay. Like, just, you have to go sit down, basically. So, and Hennessy's saying, I'm representing him. And so at some point he gets his chance when Judge Gull is basically kind of wrapping things up with the defense. Andy Baldwin asks to have Hennessy, his representative, say some words on their behalf. So I feel like this is where we're kind of getting to the showdown everyone was waiting for.
So Hennessy stands up, he approaches the judge, and he speaks for a few minutes. I think, frankly, he made some pretty good points. He indicated that there should have been more of a due process, by which he meant that attorneys Rozzi and Baldwin should have had some sort of list or something saying, these are the things we feel you're guilty of that constitute gross negligence. Because if they had such a list and knew there was going to be a hearing where it was going to be discussed, Hennessy says they could have had experts come forth and defend Baldwin and Rozzi on those points and try to make the case. Well, you say this is gross negligence. Well, look, here we have an expert who says it wasn't gross negligence. And he says what you complained about was not gross negligence. It was instead zealous representation. He started talking about the Franks memorandum. He actually referred to it as a work of art.
Yes, he literally did. At first he said it was just good lawyering, great lawyering. And then he actually shifted into it being, artwork.
A work of art. And soon after he said that, Judge Gull said, well, I never mentioned anything about the Franks memorandum. And this is when Hennessy made the point, well, since I wasn't in chambers, I don't know what you said constituted negligence or not. And basically no one does.
Most importantly, Richard Allen doesn't.
He said Richard Allen should have been in that meeting in the chambers because you're basically deciding who will or will not represent him. He should have been there so he could hear it and be a part of that process.
He was saying that treating this as a summary ruling where it's like, here's what I've decided, is a violation ultimately of Allen's rights. And he noted that while she was stating that she was doing this essentially to protect Allen's rights from what she views as inadequate and untrustworthy attorneys, that in his view, her view of them was not fair. It was not based on, he essentially, that's not their interpretation. They don't think they're negligent and they don't think they're incompetent. So it was not fair to kind of treat this as a summary judgment where she just unilaterally says, you're gone, you're negligent, goodbye, without notice, without a opportunity to defend themselves. And I thought he made good points too.
And at the end of his remarks, he said, basically, I'm paraphrasing, I recognize it's extremely unlikely that anything I'm saying is going to change your mind, but I appreciate you giving me this chance to help make a record in this case.
Yes. And so I think that's making us think, like, this probably was mostly for the defense, I would think, about setting a record. And we'll be really curious to see what comes next for them. We heard about this alleged second writ from Hennessy. That's something to keep an eye out for. We're certainly going to keep an eye out on the Supreme Court case. What do you imagine might be next? I kind of have a hard time believing that Rozzi and Baldwin are just going to go away and let the situation be. I kind of tend to think that they're going to kind of just try to keep circling this in some ways. And so how do you imagine they could next try their hand at that?
I don't even know. After the pretrial hearing ended, we talked to reporters, we talked to some defense attorneys and stuff, and no one really seemed to know what the next move for them would be.
Yes.
Or even if there is a next move. Some people who previously had been strongly saying, oh, they've got this, they can get it back, said, well, now I don't know what they can do next.
Right. I mean, I tend to think that there's something there with the Supreme Court filing where they're, essentially trying to say that she's not done a good job with the public record and that needs to be corrected. Although there's no language in there about and therefore she needs to be removed. So but I don't know. We said this on a previous episode. We may be totally wrong and out of line with this, but almost use that as the ammo later to say, hey, we need to reset things. But again, that would just delay things for Alan even more, which I can't imagine would be, I don't know.
And that was pretty much the end of it. Judge Gull remained sitting on the bench, but the defense attorneys left. Richard Allen was escorted away and people started filing out. And then Judge Gull.
I saw Kathy Allen mouth "love you too" to him as he was leaving. I didn't see what his interaction was, but I saw that. And it was really weird at the end. That was another kind of weird shambly moment because normally it's we get up, the judge gets up, leaves. There's a process, but a lot of us just remain sitting because we were just what happened? Is this over? Can we leave?
And the whole thing was, I think, a little less than 20 minutes.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So
we understand that Baldwin said to gathered reporters as he left the courthouse something to the effect of, the media needs to get on this. The media needs to dig into this. So we'll be curious to see what comes out of this.
I overheard a couple of remarks he made to Kathy Allen. Can you share those?
The world is watching. The world is seeing what's going on. So he's certainly looking at the media. I'm certainly not saying this as a criticism because I think there's some validity in doing this, but I think it's a fundamental clash between what he and Rozzi were doing and seemingly what Judge Gull wanted was this issue of trying things in the court of public opinion. That seemed to be a huge amount of defense energy was going into that at all times. And that's something we frequently saw. We saw filings that really didn't seemingly meet her standards and go towards what she wanted from them, which was file on Indiana case law. We saw a lot of work being put into things like the Franks memo, where that was all about the media. That's all about social media. That's all about intriguing people with a story and an engaging story. So, not saying one is right or one is wrong, just saying that there were these two different cases and two different modes of being that seemingly were clashing with each other in this situation in a way that it seemed like maybe in some ways conflict was going to be inevitable because from the very beginning, I think Gull made it clear that she didn't want this tried in the court of public opinion. She wanted it tried in her courtroom. And that seems to be perhaps the last place that Rozzi and Baldwin wanted it tried at times, just based on what they were putting their energy into. So here we are. What's going to happen? Will they continue to try this case in the court of public opinion through trying to get back into the case, or at the very least, maybe trying to set him up for an appeal later on by kind of continuing to give her black eyes with the Supreme Court? I imagine would be something they could do. I don't know.
And meanwhile, new attorneys on the case, Lebrato and Scremin, have some research, basically some homework to do. They need to go through and review the discovery. They also need to look at all of the outstanding motions in the case filed by Rozzi and Baldwin, things like the Franks motion to suppress. There was a motion in limine about ballistics testimony. And what they need to do is decide, do we like these motions? Do we agree with these motions? Would we like to adopt them and use them ourselves? Or would we like to prepare our own motions because we feel these motions aren't up to snuff?
Do you think that Rozzi and Baldwin will cooperate with them, given the seemingly negativity coming from their side towards these new attorneys? And I mean, I'm going to be honest, I'm pretty concerned that Attorney Scremin made comments publicly about the Delphi case to a news station going into this. That just feels like, I don't know. I have concerns. I'm just curious about what your take is.
We talk about giving people grace. If we give Baldwin and Rozzi some grace, we can believe that they genuinely want to act in the best interest of Richard Allen. And if these two men are going to be his new attorneys, Scremin and Lebrato, then it would make sense to cooperate with them.
Yeah, to embrace them rather than spreading oppo research about them.
Don't know why Hennessy was sharing that stuff with the whole courtroom.
Yeah, I mean, I think people in the back heard him. I mean, the acoustics are pretty weird, but it was not subtle. It was not a subtle, quiet conversation that we were eavesdropping on. It was very hard not to hear it.
Yes. I think people outside in the parking lot might have been able to hear it.
Oh, yeah, I don't doubt that. It's just, I don't know. It's like, it's so much has changed, and yet here we are again. When the attorneys claimed they were withdrawing on October 19th, it sort of seemed like that time maybe that would be the end of it. But we've kind of come full circle. They filed their filings. They tried to do the pro bono route. They're seemingly were kind of rallying. Maybe there was something to do with the Supreme Court. Maybe there still is. So I don't know. I don't really think we've seen the last of them. I think they're going to continue to work to come back. And I think they're, very determined attorneys at the end of the day. And who knows what will happen? Who knows what wild twists and turns this case will take?
But whatever they are, we will follow them and share them with you. And we can all talk about them, both on this program and in our Facebook discussion group. And
in the coming days, we will try to speak with experts and talk to people about how everyone's interpreting some of this stuff, because it is pretty unprecedented. It's something that we're kind of baffled with half the time, it feels, and we want to gain some more clarity as well.
Thank you so much for listening.
And thank you so much to the West Lafayette Library for providing us with this study room space. We really appreciate them. And we appreciate you all for listening. All right, bye.
Thanks so much for listening to The Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for The Murder Sheet. and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.
Look around. You can find cars like these on AutoTrader, like that car riding your tail. Or if you're tailgating right now, all those cars doubling as kitchens and living rooms are on AutoTrader too. Are you working out and listening to this ad at the same time? Well, multitasking pro, cars like the ones in the gym parking lot are for sale on AutoTrader. New cars, used cars, electric cars, maybe even flying cars. Okay, no flying cars, but as soon as they get invented, they'll be on AutoTrader. Just you wait. AutoTrader.
Botox Cosmetic, out of botulinum toxin A, FDA approved for over 20 years. So, talk to your specialist to see if Botox Cosmetic is right for you.
For full prescribing information, including boxed warning, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
Remember to ask for Botox Cosmetic by name. To see for yourself and learn more, visit BotoxCosmetic.com. That's BotoxCosmetic.com.